Thank you, Chair. For the assistance of officials, I have questions about Australia's voting record at the United Nations, particularly on Middle East issues. Minister, you've changed Australia's voting position on a number of routine motions at the United Nations relating to Israel-Palestine. I want to run through a few of them. The first is in relation to recognising Palestinian permanent sovereignty, which I understand we voted in favour of in November last year. Is that correct?
That's correct, Senator.
Well, hang on. I'd make a couple of points. I don't think it is correct for you to say, as a general proposition, that all of these votes are a change of position. There is a range of different propositions, some of which we have returned to positions Australia previously held, some of which are different positions, and all of which were in good company. So the positions that we have taken have been positions that have been supported by many of our like-mindeds and partners. The sovereignty point, I think, was an element of a motion dealing with permanent sovereignty over natural resources. Is that the resolution you're referring to?
That's the one.
Thank you. So it's a very specific.
Yes.
It's a very specific proposition, and we did consider very carefully that, because we thought it might be used in the way some have sought to use it. I would make the point that 155 members. So first we shifted from abstain to yes. So I think, from memory, the position under your government was abstention.
We'll come to that.
I could be wrong. I thought it was.
I'm going to ask follow-up questions about that, so
Sure,
please continue.
Sure. I would make the point that 155 members voted yes, including the United Kingdom, New Zealand, France, Germany and Japan. Okay. Officials should feel free to correct me if I'm wrong, but I understand that since the Second Intifada in 2002, Australia has either voted no or abstained on this resolution. Is that correct, Mr Innes-Brown?
I'd have to check, Senator. I don't have the...
We'll take that on notice.
Yeah, I don't have the records back.
That's my advice, that we have not... We certainly haven't voted...
We've just taken that on notice.
Yeah, I'm going on to elaborate on my point. My advice is that we certainly haven't voted for it ever since 2002 and the Second Intifada, and we have either voted no or abstained. But let's resolve that on notice. So we have changed our position to yes for the first time in over 20 years on that motion. How did the United States vote on that motion?
I'll check, but I'm pretty sure they probably voted no.
Yeah, that would be the Biden administration's position on that motion, I think. Do we tell the United States that we're changing our position on that issue?
Again, we'll double check, Senator, but I think we probably did, yes. We normally do.
Yes, one would hope so. If you could tell me when and in what form, whether it was UN ambassador to UN ambassador or some other communication, that would be helpful.
Senator, there are a great many of these votes in a short space of time, and particularly more so, obviously, because there have been further debates on the conflict in Gaza through this period. There is quite a lot of engagement, particularly in New York, where we would coordinate and engage with like-mindeds, including where there is differences. So we will take on notice precisely how, but I would say to you as a matter of practice, the ambassador to the UN would engage with his counterparts. That is often how differences are resolved or positions are coalesced. There's a lot of engagement and negotiation in New York.
Yes, I do understand that, but this is also a change to the bipartisan position that Australia had held for 20 years and voted alongside the United States. So I would imagine Senator, it would warrant a notification.
Well, Senator, we obviously engage very closely with the United States. I would make the point that the majority of the international community, including the United Kingdom and others that I have gone through, took the same view as Australia. So we are not an outlier.
Sure.
We are, in fact.
I understand that point.
We are in fact, with the overwhelming consensus of the majority of the international community.
I understand your point about that, but that doesn't mean it's not a changed position. And Mr Innes-Brown, if it's possible to bring it back today, that'd be helpful, given that most questions on notice are unlikely to be
Senator, I would also remind you, and I seem to recall you defending the position that your party opposed a ceasefire, which is now supported by President Trump's administration, on insiders saying it was not remarkable to disagree with the United States.
Yes,
so I'm assuming you have the same view about this.
I agree that Minister, we're a sovereign nation. We should make decisions in our own national interest, but they are a close and important ally, and if we are to change a 20-year bipartisan position, we should notify our closest ally. And I'm just trying to explore that. Anyway, let's move on to another motion, because otherwise this can take a very long time. I understand that we changed our position on the oil slick on Lebanese shores motion. We traditionally vote no on this resolution since it was put in 2006, but we voted yes. Is that right?
Yes, Senator, we voted yes.
What's the reason for our change of position on the oil slick on Lebanese shores motion?
So we voted, we had reservations about some aspects of the text, but the vote reflected our concern about the conflict in Lebanon and Israel, and also the destruction, displacement, the loss of civilian life that was taking place.
How does a motion about an oil slick in 2006 relate to a contemporary conflict with Hezbollah?
It went to the issue of damage and displacement and those issues that were ongoing, Senator. So,
presumably a historic issue, though, and it's a historic issue which we'd already taken a position on.
The text of the resolution has also been updated as time, it becomes more, there's elements in it that become more contemporary when I looked at it. There are certainly new elements that were not in there that relate to developments since then.
Okay, so again, if you could take on notice and come back today if possible about when and if we notified our US partners. Another resolution, the peaceful settlement on the question of Palestine. We voted yes. My advice is that we had previously voted no or abstained since the Second Intifada in 2002. Is that correct?
We did abstained most recently, but yeah, as I said, the full period going back to 2002, the pattern I'll have to take on notice, Senator.
Yeah, I think we shifted from abstain to yes. And again, more than 155 members voted yes, including the United Kingdom, New Zealand, France, Germany and Japan. We
shifted from that position of abstain under your previous voting at the United Nations or the previous governments?
I'd have to go back. There are multiple motions with multiple different positions. In fact, Australia's position over the 20 years has not always been consistent, which is, I'm not critical of that, I'm making an observation. We'll come back to you on that.
Well, Mr Innes-Brown, you might be able to help us. Have we ever voted yes for this motion previously?
I'll take it on notice, Senator.
Okay, thank you. And also notification of our ally, the United States, on that. On the motion, division for Palestinian rights of the Secretariat, I'm advised we abstained and we'd previously voted no since 2004. Is that correct?
On this occasion, we shifted from no to abstain, but again, the voting record prior will check on.
Why did we shift our position on that issue?
There's an explanation of vote, Senator.
Yes, I'm asking you for it.
Okay,
We'll
well, I
provide
can
that on
give it.
notice.
You can't provide it now?
No, we'll provide it on notice.
Mr Innes-Brown doesn't know, or you don't know. Foreign Minister, you directed a change of position.
Senator, there's quite a lot that we do, and we take these decisions very carefully. We consider very carefully the text because most of the time the text will have aspects with which we agree, aspects with which we disagree, or we have concerns about, and a judgment has to be made, which includes consideration of both the context and also like-minded positions about what is the appropriate and principled path that also reflects Australia's interests, which is ultimately in two states. We make these decisions carefully after discussions, advice, sometimes in compressed timeframes, obviously, particularly if there are amendments to the resolutions, but that is what we seek to do. And where appropriate, we read an explanation of vote that clarifies our position as to why we are doing it. And he has now got the explanation of vote from this particular one, so perhaps he can simply...
Very good.
Mr Innes-Brown can read it.
Read it?
Please.
Sure. So, Australia's shift from no to abstention today on the resolution for the Division for Palestinian Rights of the Secretariat reflects the position our country took until 2003. Our return to this position reflects our frustration and that of the great majority of countries that more than 77 years since the General Assembly adopted Resolution 181, a plan for two states, side by side, one Jewish, one Palestinian, a Palestinian state still does not exist. It reflects Australia's belief that we must all once again contribute new ways to build momentum towards lasting peace. Because a two-state solution, a Palestinian state and the state of Israel side by side within safe, secure and internationally recognised borders remains the only hope of breaking the endless cycle of violence. It remains the only hope to see a secure and prosperous future for both peoples. Australia could not move further than abstention because of our concerns over the work of the division to date. We continue to have reservations that the Division for Palestinian Rights devotes too many resources to a one-sided perspective of the conflict. UN divisions such as this must do better. They must offer constructive advice and support to the international community to work together to pave a path to lasting peace. Because any lasting solution to the Middle East conflict cannot be at the expense of either Palestinians or Israelis.
I would also make the point, Senator, that we return to the position of the Howard government in that vote.
Well, not the Howard government after 2004.
No. But the Howard government prior to that.
Yes, something changed in early 2000
well, sure,
on Israel-Palestine,
Senator,
didn't
I'm making the point. This is, Australia has adopted a range of positions reflecting what we regard as our national interests and our interest in a two-state outcome, which Mr Innes-Brown has outlined.
Yes, but it's pretty important what happened in the early 2000s and the Second Intifada. It changed.
Senator,
Sorry, Minister, I haven't finished asking my question.
You made a comment. I'll respond.
Minister, I haven't finished making the comment, but I do have a question. I'd like the opportunity to ask it.
Well,
Senators,
I'll respond to your comment.
You can after I've finished. I haven't finished yet, Minister. You objected to Senator Faruqi interjecting on you before, and I asked you off courtesy.
Come on. Senator Patterson, you've got the call.
Thank you, Chair. As I said, it was an important event in the early 2000s. It was the Second Intifada. We changed our foreign policy after that for very good reason, and it was bipartisan, including under the Gillard-Rudd governments. You have since changed it. Minister.
Senator, and the expression of vote, the explanation of vote which is outlined reflects why. And Senator, I would also make the point to you, if there's anything that is demonstrated I'll rephrase. We have seen a horrific terrorist attack on October 7th. We have seen since then loss of life, including civilian life, women and children, at a scale which has not been seen. Now, I don't hear very often from you and your party anything about the loss of Palestinian lives. We mourn every life and we want peace for both peoples. And so our position in the UN reflects that.
Or perhaps you should listen more carefully, Senator Wong. Speaking only for myself, I delivered a speech after the 7th of October in the Senate, which was primarily concerned with the loss of Palestinian life.
Well, Senator, just as the Manchurian candidate disavows, maybe you and your leader should have a conversation.
Have you had a conversation with the Prime Minister about his use of the phrase Manchurian candidate?
Well, Senator, I'm making the point that Mr Dutton only ever talks about one experience of the conflict.
Yes, and I'm making the point.
We need in this country, just as I said to Senator Thorpe, to recognise that we have to do what we can to break the cycle of violence, including, and we have to do what we can to prevent that hatred and that violence coming to Australia.
Okay. In December, Australia voted for a ceasefire motion at the UN which failed to condemn Hamas or hold it to account in any way. That's not consistent with what you have said, Foreign Minister, and Australia's foreign policy. Why did we vote for a motion that let Hamas off the hook?
Oh, please.
It literally did.
Senator, 152 other countries in December 2023, including New Zealand, Canada, Japan, France and Korea, voted for that ceasefire. It is a ceasefire that is now being achieved and supported by the Trump administration. Like, you are the ones who are an outlier on ceasefires because you are the ones who oppose the very ceasefire that President Trump's administration has worked to deliver. Now, our position on Hamas has been consistent. We condemn Hamas as a terrorist organisation, full stop. And I really object to everything, anything where you disagree with us being turned into some accusation that we are other than condemnatory of them. It is frankly beneath you.
Minister, if Israel had followed your advice and entered into a ceasefire when you first called on them to do so, Hassan Nasrallah and Yahya Sinwar would be alive today. The death of those terrorists is something that your government has welcomed. How do you think they would have been removed from the battlefield had they followed your advice and implemented a ceasefire?
Well, Senator, the same question can be asked of every other country that also supported a ceasefire.
Every other country is not here today, Minister. You're here.
Senator, the position I have taken from the commencement of this has been Israel has a right to defend itself and it must do so in accordance with international law.
We've also changed our position on recognition of a Palestinian state. You have said that we should explore unilaterally recognising a Palestinian state prior to the conclusion of a peace negotiation between Israel and Palestine. Why have you changed that long-standing bipartisan position?
Senator, I think that is a somewhat oversimplified articulation of what I said. What I have said is that long-term peace in the region will require a pathway to Palestinian self-determination, and recognition is an integral part of that. I've said that a Palestinian state needs a reformed Palestinian Authority. I've said that it must not be such a state must not be in a position to threaten Israel's security. And I've said there is no role for Hamas in the future governance of Gaza. I've also said, and I think you're referencing my General Assembly speech, that we wanted to engage in ways to build momentum, including the role of the Security Council in setting a pathway for two states, including with a timeline for the International Declaration of Palestinian Statehood. So the position is more nuanced than you have put to me in your question. I would say this: why do we believe that? Because there is an endless cycle of violence in the Middle East. We do not believe, and I think it is your position too, that will be resolved until the issue of Palestinian statehood alongside Israeli security is resolved. Now, we might have differences of views of how to get there. I've set out the range of matters that obviously would have to be dealt with. But ultimately, peace will only come when these issues are resolved. Having said that, Senator, I think we all know that the key near-term issue is to urge that the ceasefire hold and that hostages are returned. And we've seen some both moving images of hostages coming home, and we've seen some dreadful and distressing stories of people who have lost their lives or being killed, being returned. So this is a conflict that is deeply distressing. It's deeply distressing for many in the Australian community, many of whom hold different views.
Indeed.
I have sought to work to not bring the conflict here. I've sought to work to have a principled position. I appreciate it's not what, the Australian Jewish Association, who Senator Sharma hosted in Parliament House, believes in one state. That is no Palestinians. There are others who have a different view. Australia seeks to take a principled view, and that's what I've sought to do.
Thank you. Let me quote the remarks of our ambassador, Mr. Larson, to the General Assembly on the 10th of May 2024, when he said, and I quote, "Nevertheless, Australia no longer accepts that recognition can only come at the end of the peace process." So the government's policy is that we could recognise a Palestinian state even if they haven't engaged in a peace process with Israel, isn't it?
Last question.
I think the point is there are those within the Israeli political system, including Prime Minister Netanyahu, who have said they are not supportive of a Palestinian state. Now that presents certain issues, doesn't it? But I would make the point that articulation is very similar to the articulation from memory that Secretary Cameron put previously when he was Foreign Secretary.
All right.
I think he described it as it could be an input or something like that to the peace process. So I think the international community is seeking to try and resolve how it is we can break this cycle of violence.
I'm going to move the call along.
Thank you, Chair.
Thanks.
I'm going to hand the call over to Senator Patterson.
Thank you, Chair. Foreign Minister, I just want to return to our questions before lunch in relation to Australia's positions on Middle East policies, voting position on Middle East motions at the United Nations. You've articulated the rationale for the government's changed position. Do you think it's fair to say that the government's position is less supportive of or less close to Israel than the previous government's position?
Well, there are different ways in which you could articulate it. I would say the government's position is more consistent with the majority of the international community, including often the majority of Five Eyes, and that the government's position is more consistent with progress towards a two-state solution. But ultimately, if the question, we have to make judgments which include consideration of the circumstances in which this is occurring.
Sure. Let me word it in the most neutral way possible to see if we can find agreement. Australia votes less often with Israel at the United Nations compared to the previous government. Is that true?
I think the position of the previous government is a matter of record, as is ours.
Okay, I'll take that as a yes. Prior to the last election, Mr Dreyfus, the then Shadow Attorney General, wrote an article for the Jewish News in which he said, and I quote, "By suggesting that Australia's support for Israel is somehow conditional on which of the two parties form government, as he did in his interview, Mr Morrison is undermining Israel's and Australia's long-term interests for what he hopes is his own short-term partisan advantage." Don't we now know that the change of government has in fact changed Australia's support for Israel?
I think there are two different propositions. One is, do I think that, the first is, we would argue, in Australia's interest and in Israel's interest for support for the existence of the State of Israel to be bipartisan and beyond partisan debate. The second point I would make is we continue to advocate for a two-state solution, which necessarily includes both support for the existence of the Israeli state and the creation of a Palestinian state. I do not think it is actually in the interests of either Australia or Israel for the issue of our support for the existence of the State of Israel to be a matter of partisanship. I know that just like on the issue of China, this is something that your party seeks to make an issue of domestic politics. We do not.
Perhaps we just have a different view on the merits of the issue. Is that a possibility?
Well, you examine your conscience, Senator.
It's very clear. Thank you for the invitation. Mr Burns wrote in the Jewish News, also prior to the last election, that irrespective of whoever forms government, it will be one, the Jewish community should feel that it will be one that is committed to safeguarding the interests of our community, from combating anti-Semitism in line with the IRA definition to maintaining strong ties with our friends in Israel. Both parties have demonstrated their steadfast commitment to our cause, and indeed the more bipartisanship we see on Israel and the Jewish community, the better. Do you agree that, in fact, there is a substantive difference between the parties of government on the question of Australia's foreign policy towards Israel?
Well, I think I do agree that Mr Dutton, I don't believe, has ever expressed support for two states.
That's not true?
I'd be very happy to see it. I do believe that it's true that Mr Sharma hosted an event at Parliament for an organisation that is supportive only of one state. And I do believe, as I've made clear on anti-Semitism, that some of your party have chosen to make this a partisan political issue. And I have long-standing position, and I think demonstrated in terms of how I've dealt with these issues in the public arena, of believing that the major parties should stand together in the face of all forms of prejudice, including anti-Semitism.
That's the third time you've referenced Senator Sharma meeting with the Australian Jewish Association on, and which I think you're implying is problematic because they don't support a two-state solution. Have you ever met with someone who doesn't support the two-state solution?
Well, my point is it's not just meeting, it's hosting them in Parliament House. So it's up to Mr Sharma to explain that. My position, my position is that I support two states. Am I part of promulgating a single state position, enabling people to promote that? I don't believe so. So I don't think that's consistent with what we should be doing.
Have you ever hosted anyone at Parliament House who is opposed to a two-state solution?
Not for a video screening and an event. I have met, I think you commented on this, with APAN's executive? I'm sorry, I've forgotten what role he has some time ago, and I put the same view that I would put to you. But if that's the equivalent, I would ask, I hope that Senator Sharma, in introducing the video was clear that he didn't support it.
Well,
if that's the case, then I accept that.
You met with Nasser Mashni, who's the representative of APAN.
That's what I was referencing.
In Parliament House on the 18th of October 2023. From the photo that you posted on your Twitter account, it looks like it was in your ministerial office in Parliament House. Are you aware that Mr Mashni is opposed to a two-state solution and has also called for an end to the peace process? My engagement with him was consistent. I expressed the view in that meeting
as I always express, which is the Australian government's position.
How many times have you met with Mr Mashney?
I think Senator Birmingham also met with him that day.
Senator Birmingham, I'm advised, has not met with Mr Mashney since the 7th of October. He met with him prior to the 7th of October.
Yeah.
But how many times have you met with Mr Mashney?
I'm trying to think if I've met him other than that time in person. I'll take on notice.
Have you met with him at any time since the 13th of May last year?
Is that when the meeting to which you're referring?
No, that was October 23 was the first meeting. I'm asking if you've met with him any time after the 13th of May 2024.
What's the relevance of that day?
I'll come to that in my next
Well, no,
question.
I'm asking you the question. I'm not going to be drawn into this. What's the relevance of that day?
Okay. Well, let me assist you. It was reported in The Australian on the 13th of May that at a pro-Palestine rally at Monash University, Mr Mashney said, and I quote, "Israel and Australia share two things in common. Aside from being a S-hole racist settler colony, that's the number one thing, they also have the highest incidence of skin cancer. Their skin is designed for Northern Europe, where there is not so much sun, so you need to be white, so you get extra vitamin D. But our skin is designed for this land. It's designed for the Middle East." Are those kind of anti-Semitic and racist views appropriate for a person who has met with the Foreign Minister?
Well, they're not appropriate for anyone.
Where have you been? Has these comments been drawn to your attention previously?
Look, they may have been at the time. I don't recall it's some time ago, but they're not appropriate for anyone.
Now that you've heard them, would you meet with Mr Mashney again?
I don't believe I have met with him again.
But now that I put those comments to you, were he to ask you for a meeting again, would you meet with him?
Well, I don't believe I have, and I will take on notice the question you asked previously about whether I'd met with him since those remarks were made. But I'd just make this point. There are a lot of different views, aren't there, in the Australian community? And we do engage. My concern about Mr Sharma's role is that is a promotion, not an engagement. He may have a different view, and I'm happy to listen to it. But I do meet with people, and so do you, who don't agree with us. But our position has not changed.
I agree. We all meet with people, and in this game, often people we disagree with.
Yeah,
But
I think
you-
my office...
I haven't finished my question.
Sorry, I just wanted to come
Minister.
back to you. I'm being polite.
Okay.
The advice I have, and I will check on notice, that is the only meeting I had with Mr Mashney, which is in October 2023, so that's prior to that. I've also said, given this quite publicly, comments and actions by Mr Mashney have been reprehensible. I've made it clear to Mr Mashney our view that Israel has a right to exist and a right to defend itself.
Thank you. The reason why I'm asking these questions is that you introduced this topic by your criticism of Senator Sharma for hosting AJA, and you're now characterising him as promoting AJA. But I would
He
argue...
is here. He could just speak for himself.
Well, thanks. He may wish to in a moment. He may wish to in a moment. I'm sure the chair will give him that opportunity. But I would argue that by posting a smiling photo with Mr Mashney on the 18th of October, you were at least as complicit in promoting him and his views as Mr Sharma was of the AGA.
My recollection, as I said, is at the time Senator Birmingham also met with him. That is my recollection, Senator, so not just prior.
Well, that's my advice.
Well, I don't know that that's correct, but so that is my recollection, that he also met with him. And I've made my views about things that Mr Mashney has said clear publicly, and I don't walk away from them.
Your colleague, the Minister for Home Affairs, Tony Burke, has met with Mr Mashney. In fact, Mr Mashney has boasted that the government's decision to refuse a visa application from the former Israeli Minister Ayelet Shaked was based on a dossier that APAN handed to Mr Burke at that meeting. Is Mr Mashney an appropriate person to influence Australian government immigration policy?
Senator, that's a question. Well, I don't know whether anything you said is true.
Well, it's Mr Mashney who said it,
sorry,
it's not me.
excuse me. You're putting a range of propositions to me, judging on the basis of what you have done to date. They are very selective and often not accurate representations of what has happened or what has been said. That's my judgment about your questions so far. So I'm certainly not going to take as read what you have said. I hope you had the opportunity to put that to the Home Affairs portfolio.
I did, and they took it
All
on
right,
notice.
well then, I'm sorry?
I did, and they took it on
Well, there
notice.
you go. You have your answer.
Well, I'm asking for your view.
Well, that is just a way of trying to get in this portfolio what you couldn't get in Home Affairs.
I'm interested in your view as the Foreign Minister, but if you don't want to give it, I understand. I'm happy
No,
to
I've
move
made my
on
view. No,
to
hang
the
on.
next matter.
Can we not have the snarky comments? I have.
Senator Wong.
No, Senator. I have made
Let's
my
just,
views on Mr Mashney's comments clear.
Thank
Full
you for
stop. So can you just accept that? It may not be what you want for the purposes of creating more division at home. I find it remarkable that the Coalition is so intent on making partisan gains on this in their perspective, you do not listen to what the head of ASIO says. It is remarkable. He says turn the temperature down and you constantly try to turn it up. It is not responsible.
I remind you, Senator Wong, that you initiated this conversation and this topic with your criticism of Senator Sharma, but let's move on to another matter.
just
Shall we
on
talk about
senators?
18C, Senator Patterson?
Shall
Shall we talk about that?
I think it's probably not the right forum for that, Senator Wong.
No,
senators.
of course not. The fact that you defended people's right to be a bigot, that's
Chair,
what
I'm
you
keen
did.
to ask questions
no,
to the
no, of
Foreign
course you
Minister.
don't want to talk about that because it demonstrates.
All right.
It demonstrates the political choice you make about when you stand up against prejudice and when you don't.
Okay.
You were happy for people to have a right to be a bigot, quote Senator Brandis. You were one of the advocates for the removal of that provision in the Racial Discrimination Act which protected people from offensive content. So, you know, let's be really clear about who is consistent against prejudice, discrimination and hatred and who is not.
I'm very, very happy
Let's get
for
back to
the Australian
questions
Jewish
on
community
the budget.
to cast their verdict about who has been more supportive of them over the last 15 months, whether it's you or me. I think the verdict would be overwhelming. But moving on. Has DFAT, any DFAT buildings or diplomatic offices here or overseas been illuminated with the colour orange in memory of the Bibbers family?
Sorry?
Have any DFAT facilities or buildings, including overseas, been illuminated in the colour orange in memory of the Bibbers family?
Take it on notice.
You would surely know if you had.
I'll take it on notice. I don't believe so, but I'll take it on notice.
Okay. Is the department aware that several landmarks around the world, including in the United States, Brazil, Argentina, Serbia, North Macedonia and Myanmar, have illuminated various buildings and monuments in the colour orange as an expression of solidarity with the Bibbers family?
I'll take your word for it.
Has DFAT at any point considered that any Commonwealth buildings or diplomatic offices or national monuments, such as the Sydney Opera House, should be illuminated in the colour orange in solidarity with the Bibbers family?
Senator, it's not an issue that we've focused on. Rather, we have been consistent with the government's position on return of the hostages, been advocating for the return of the hostages, obviously directly supporting in our discussions with the Israeli government, their ambassador here. In our explanations of vote, we read out one earlier, but indeed in the December 10 explanation of vote, we were very unequivocal in that statement with regard to the questions of Hamas, the hostages, condemnation of the first, support for the return of the hostages. So
Thank you.
Perhaps I can add, Senator, we, in relation to this matter, as you're probably aware, there was a memorial service yesterday in Israel. Our charge d'affaires from our mission in Israel did attend that event.
Thank you. Ambassador wasn't available?
He's on leave.
Pardon?
He's on leave.
Okay, it's a bit hard to hear when you hold your hands in front of your mouth. Has the government made any public statement in support or sympathy with the Bibbers family since their bodies were returned by Hamas?
So I was asked a question, I think in the same press conference, or the same interview where the issue of the Chinese, of the PLAN was discussed, on Friday from memory, but that was, so I made some comments there in response to what we then knew. Since then, I've provided the following comments. I'm not sure to which outlets I can find that out on notice. I condemn Hamas unequivocally for the killings of Shiri Bibas and her children, which is yet more evidence of the vile brutality of the terrorist group. I've made clear previously the manner in which the families returned to Israel was sickening and cruel. We want to see hostages released. They deserve to be released with dignity. Australia supports the ceasefire and hostage agreement and calls on all parties to respect its terms and implement it in full. Actions such as this only put that goal at risk.
Thank you. Minister, will the government consider doing as we did after the 7 October and support the illumination of any public buildings such as Parliament House or the Opera House in orange, as we did in blue and white after the 7th of October?
Well, let me take that on notice. Obviously, they're not matters actually for, they'd be matters for the presiding officers as they were after October 7, and matters for, I think, the Premier of New South Wales in relation to the Opera House. But I'll take that on notice.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair.